couple of years ago, I got myself a high definition TV, and because I couldn't afford a full-size one, because at that time they were really, really expensive, I got myself a smaller one, about a 32-inch LCD flat panel screen. And I was really happy with the quality of it, so I thought, I don't have cable or satellite or anything like that, so what the hell, I'll go ahead and give it a shot. Now, I hadn't had cable for about 6 or 7 years before that. I've been trying to save on expenses, so I just decided not to go with it. So I went with DirecTV because they have these packages where you order them, and they give you a lot of channels for a very low price. It's kind of like an introductory teaser, and a lot of the satellite and cable stations do that. But in my case, after the introductory period wore off, DirecTV had like some kind of inbuilt sensor where they knew to block off the channels that I especially wanted, so that for my money, I could only get the channels I really hated the most. For the first couple of years of having cable, I didn't mind it. The novelty of it was really nice, and I'd have to search, but inevitably there would be something on National Geographic Channel or Ovation TV or a History Channel, one of those a program I might actually be interested in. But after the period where the price went up a lot and I could only afford the channels that weren't worth watching to me, I decided that it was time for the cable to go. Now, before I did that, I tried to keep it going, but I couldn't get myself to be interested in what was on. It's surprising to me when you may get a couple hundred channels, but even with that, there's literally nothing worth watching. That to me is a sign that our current programming is really, really bad. I know with DirecTV you have your primary channels that 3, 5, or NBC, ABC, CBS, which you can get at home with rabbit ears anyway. So and that's really hit or miss. Some of the programs are good. Most of them are complete trash. Then you've got your sports channels, which they would give me about, it would seem like a couple hundred sports channels, but I'm not interested in sports. So that to me was all just a big waste of block. Thumbing down the menu screen and having to deal with that was just tiring enough in itself. So then I would get these home shopping channels, which I don't home shop because that's a waste of money. So that was another huge block of things that were wasted. There was a number of religious channels where there'd be like a televangelist woman with like pink hair and a guy with a worse than Donald Trump comb over, spouting on and on about this religious thing or that. So, of course, those channels were out. There was a number of children's channels, which I don't watch children's programming, so that more or less was out for me too. So it ended up being that, like I said, there was the National Geographic Channel, Discovery, TLC, but through the years has got progressively worse. The Comedy Central station was not too bad, but other than that, there wasn't a whole lot that I really was into watching. So I thought, well, if I'm paying $40 to $80 to $100 a month for this, and I ended up I would go for stretches without actually watching it, what's the point? So I just went ahead and decided to cancel. Now, canceling cable is no easy task. I mean, they practically use mind control to keep you on the line and deciding to keep going with it when you try and cancel. I mean, they have retention departments that probably used to be former CIA waterboarders, because they are incredibly effective. The one time I tried to cancel several times, and they were able to use their Jedi mind shit to keep me aboard. But finally, I reached somebody, and I had my resolve. It was very strong, and I was able to get it canceled. And the thing is, it's been over a year now, and I don't miss it. I thought I was going to miss it, but I don't. I love the convenience of the internet in that you can, if there's a topic you're interested in, you could just look it up directly. I have my computer hooked up to my flat panel, so I can watch YouTube and Hulu and anything I want really and get it directly off the internet. I can get it on demand exactly when I want it, and I don't have to wait for somebody else to decide, what I should be watching. And the thing is, I never really was that into TV anyway. Years and years ago, I used to follow Survivor, but, I haven't watched that show in about 10 years. And there's not really a whole lot else I'm really, really all that into. If I had a Netflix account now, I could watch some of the programs that I really like when I want to watch them anyway. My friend and I were watching Breaking Bad, which is an incredibly well-written program, but we can watch that on Netflix. So, I'm better off just paying $8 a month to use Netflix if that's the case. And it's amazing to me, like how, it was said back I think it was in the 70s, one of the former government officials in charge of television said that television has become a vast wasteland. And you'd think for the technology of what it is, that wouldn't be the case, but in fact it is. I mean, the production values on a lot of these programs are really, really bad. And the acting is really poor too. I mean, if you look at some of the folks that go into being movie actors and actresses versus television, sometimes there's a pretty big difference. And, sometimes you'll have folks that are movie actors that will go and be on television programs and they're pretty decent at it. I know Kiefer Sutherland was actually a movie actor until he did 24. And, he was pretty good. I won't count Charlie Sheen on that because on that 2.5 Men show, of course, like Charlie Sheen just had to play himself, so he didn't really need to act on that. Speaking of that show, I can't believe that was a #1 show. That show was so canned and so predictable and just terrible that if that's what the best of television has to offer, then not watching TV, I think I'm really better off. For my money, I'd rather just be able to be on the internet and read. The other thing that I think is really really worthless about television as well as like the news programs, it's more about entertainment than it is about news. When they'll talk 1 minute about the trade deficit or the failure of the global climate talks, and the next minute they're talking about Kim Kardashian and what she wore and the gossip about the breakdown of one of her marriages, then that they can't be all that serious about news. And, the programs that are on, I mean, most of them are copies of each other. I mean, there was a period where there was 5 or 6 different versions of CSI. There was 5 or 6 different versions of Law and Order. Everything is just trying to plug in a formula to be able to copy whatever it takes to get eyeballs on the screen so they can get advertising revenue. And it's really unfortunate because, the TV has the ability to reach a lot of people, and other than public television, it's not really being done all that well. So I don't really bother with it. But even news that's on the internet in general doesn't tend to be the best. The corporate sponsored news programs, because they don't want to offend their advertisers, are usually too oriented toward entertainment. I like to watch Democracy Now!, which is a non-corporate sponsored advertising sponsored news gathering organization, and it's actually really good. And then on TV, there's a lot of things too. There's a lot of sports things which I'm not really into. But I haven't watched TV in a long time, and I don't miss it. My TV now is more of a monitor for my computer than it is, anything remotely like an actual device for watching television. And I still watch movies. There are a lot of movies are pretty bad, but there are some that are still artfully done and that are real quality. So I like to have a TV for viewing those kinds of things. But, I was reading the other day, they were talking about how your average person watches like 40 hours a week of TV, and kids grow up on thousands of hours of commercials and TV programs. And it's surprising to me that people can be so into TV given how bad it is. I mean, they're literally stuffing their brains with garbage. And, it's sad that there has been a decline of literacy as well ever since TV was introduced. I mean, TV is designed to entertain, not really to educate your mind. And, reading requires a certain amount of concentration that a lot of people aren't interested in doing anymore. You look at, when you go out to dinner, you can look and you see teenagers and other folks, and they can't even sit down and have a meal without having a telephone conversation or namely texting. I mean, these kids are getting texts every 10 seconds. And they don't even, they're not present in the moment for the folks that they're supposed to be, visiting with. So I think our sense of attention and our sense of quality has been kind of deprogrammed through the last few years through the different kinds of media that we're using. I mean, even the kinds of things that are on TV that are of value, like say for C-SPAN, for example, sometimes I'll just watch like Senate hearings, but they're not compared to like what you see on TV with explosions and sex every 10 minutes. I mean, it doesn't really compare. It's hard to compete with that in terms of what people want to see. And the fact that political candidates get most of their votes based on TV spots and television commercials, I think is really telling as well. The fact that so many people are into TV and are influenced by ads, which the television ads for political candidates are usually the most brain dead things you'll ever see. But they're effective. And so it really, I think, says a lot about the mentality of a lot of folks that are watching TV, which is mostly everyone. And that's something that I think is really something to be concerned about. I think if I had children growing up, they probably would be the only kids that would not watch TV that much. I mean, it seems like, TV serves many purposes now, and in one of them, I think, is to just kind of be a background, kind of like a white noise for people, so they can hear voices while they're going about their day. And so there's that kind of like a dialogue. It fills up like a little bit of emptiness you might be feeling inside while you're doing chores around the house or whatever. And I think it will be strange, would be strange for a kid to grow up without watching TV at all. But I don't have kids and I don't know what it's like. I mean, kids have a lot of energy and, who knows, maybe when there's kids programming on, I'll turn it on just so that I could take a break so the kids will be distracted for a while if there's something I need to do. And, if that's the case, I really wouldn't blame me or anybody else for wanting to have that. I mean, parents need a break too, that's for sure. And a lot of the programs that are for kids I don't think are necessarily terrible. I mean, if you watch them as an adult, you might rot your brain in about 10 seconds, but for kids, they're okay. It would be nice, I think, if there were higher quality programs on TV, but we can't have those things. We can't have things that are like PBS, and the question is why? Well, because it's sponsored by advertising. Well, why is that? It's not that advertisers and companies want us to be dumb. They're just giving us what we want to see. And as an audience, if we want to see junk and garbage because that's what we're willing to watch, then really when we get that, it's no one else's fault but our own, really. If it is applying to the lowest common denominator, then that says something about the vast majority of us, I think, doesn't it? And so in that way, when it comes to elections. Our politicians reflect who we are. When people voted for George Bush, they said, well, Gore seemed too wooden and robotic and, uppity. They wanted somebody like George Bush who they felt they could sit down and have a beer with. Well, never mind the fact that George Bush came from a political dynasty and extreme wealth, so he's really not like you. But aside from that, he wasn't a good president in terms of doing things that expanded our liberties or made things for a vast majority of Americans economically better. You'd think that we would have learned as a country that maybe we shouldn't vote for the guy we'd rather sit down and have a beer with. Maybe the guy who seems wooden and stiff is a guy that may be able to make good decisions. Bush took great pride in the fact that he was the decider, but it doesn't mean that he was the decider that made right decisions. I think that people vote based on their insecurities and things too. And that's unfortunate. If you look at the last election, Obama, it's like he was a pretty good looking guy. He's kind of young, he had like flat abs and the press made a big deal about, what a great speech giver he was and, how good looking he was. And, as it stands now, we've got the front runner in the Republicans is Mitt Romney. And people say, oh, well, he looks presidential. Well, yeah, he's got good hair and he may look presidential, but, there were other folks that looked presidential that were terrible presidents. In the 1920s, Warren G. Harding was someone who, at the time, people said he looked presidential. He seemed very presidential. Well, when he became president, he was a terrible president. His administration and the folks he surrounded himself were incredibly corrupt. He himself was more or less indifferent to corruption. He was a pretty ineffective leader. So just based on what someone may look like may not make them the best leader in the world. If you look at somebody like Dennis Kucinich, who is probably not in the top 10% of presidential looking guys, very well might be somebody that looks out for the average person's interest very well, but because he doesn't present as well on TV, he's not going to have the same chance to be president. And if the media were to focus now on that kind of thing, FDR wouldn't have been president because he was crippled. And he ended up being one of the best, if not the best president this country's ever seen. And between him and Abraham Lincoln, historians have consistently voted FDR as being an absolutely tremendous president. And, he got us through the Great Depression and World War II pretty well. So I think TV has really brought us back in a lot of ways in a bad way. And I think that's the thing that bothers me the most is the fact that if the candidates that we have are a reflection of who we are, then the candidates we've had, haven't been the best. And why are things like that? I wish I could know more. I mean, I think the fact that our educational system is currently under attack by folks who want to destroy it and beat up on teachers. I think that there's a lot in that as well. But anyway, I don't have cable. I don't miss it. My wife doesn't miss it. And by pulling the plug, we saved ourselves about $80 a month. And I don't think I'm going to go back.